Yo, I'm sorting through some heinous haters like a pooper scooper. I'm just trying to take my life like a Koopa Trooper. I'm Double Mario, that mean I'm super. And I'm freaking dangerous like a Chupa Cabre. Got them all day like a Kanye, but I'm way better getting cheddar in Monterey. But Jack, you don't know, man. You got the show, man. You want roast beef? Well, I'm Arby.
What's up, my wizards? It's Dev. From Mtg, we like magic, and today we're going on a trip on our favorite rocket ship. That's right, it's finally time for Green-Black Journey to Eternity. That's right, kids. We're going on a journey to eternity. They think they hurting me, but I'm just burning them like currency. Currently murdering this beat like burgers from Burger King. I'm from Mtg, getting higher than attorney's fees. Sorry. It rhymes with itself, so it just makes me want to go off. It's one of the reasons I like the card, but there's obviously a bunch of other reasons. What intrigued me most about this card from the very first time I ever saw it was that it strikes me as an amazing card advantage engine, you know? If you can reanimate a creature every single turn, that is straight up card advantage. And we've seen decks use tools like Liliana in the past, a lot of times, to reanimate creatures, again, as a form of card advantage as the game gets on and goes long. But, honestly, we've got it all over Liliana, because a land is so much harder to remove than something like a Planeswalker, or a creature like the Scarab God, or an artifact like Godfarer's Gift, you know? And in a way, we've even got it over the Scarab God and Godfarer's Gift. Just a little bit, because they exile creatures to reanimate them. They create tokens, essentially. We don't do that. We can reanimate the same creature 30 times in a game, if that's what we choose to do. But you gotta be realistic. If there's a downside to Journey, it's pretty obvious. Obviously, this has to resolve. They can just counter the Journey. But aside from that, they can just kill the creature you're targeting with Journey, and then you'll just get blown out on turn 3, you know. You lose your creature, you lose your Journey, you skipped your turn 3. That's tempo all day, you know. It just really hurts if this doesn't stick. So you have to be very safe when you play Journey. You have to make sure that it sticks. But on the bright side, most decks, especially if you're on the play, most decks are going to use their turn 2 to play an Earthshaker Kenra, a Kari Zev, a Glintsleeve Siphoner, a Winding Constrictor. There's a bunch of stuff that people will play on turn 2. So as you go into turn 3, they're usually going to be tapped down and you'll be free to play your Journey. At least that's been my experience. But against more controlling decks that hold up mana for removal, you know, Moment of Craving, Fatal Push, red removal, there's a ton of stuff you have to worry about. Even in against mono red aggro, there are things that you have to worry about. Don't worry, we've got some tools to make sure that we safeguard this play. One thing I should point out about Ixalan is that it can be activated at instant speed. You can do it at the end of your opponent's turn. If you didn't have anything better to do in that turn cycle, you can do it during your opponent's combat step, which is when you usually want to do it, I find. So, the card is just unbelievable that this isn't restricted to sorcery speed. Usually effects like this would be, but this just lets us do it any old time in response to something our opponent's doing or when they swing in, and that's actually insane. It's one of the better things about the card. But if we're going to play a deck based around an aura, we have to play creatures. That's sort of part of the deal here. We've got 23 of them in this deck, which I think is right. I've played as many as 25 here. But there's some spells we definitely need, and obviously we have to make room for Journey as well, on top of a removal suite. So I think 23 is the right number for creatures. Now, usually I start on the bottom of the curve, we kind of work our way up, but I'm going to start with some of the most important creatures in the deck first, and they both happen to be 3-drops, beginning with Thrashing Brontodon, which we'll play a whole 3 copies of. Depending on your local meta, you could push this to 4 in the main deck if you felt like it. If you're coming up against, there's a lot of decks actually this is relevant against, you know. It's just decent to have game 1 against, you know, Godfarer's Gift and a bunch of other stuff. You know, Heart of Kiran, Anointed Procession. You're going to come across like Drake Haven decks occasionally. It'll kill a Torrential Gearhulk when you need it to. Cast out Ixalan's Binding, Baffling End. I mean, there's a million targets for this thing in the format right now. So you're not really going to, you're not going to feel too bad for having it in the main deck too often, but the best thing about it is that it works exactly like you want it to with the Journey to Eternity. Seriously, totally works. All you have to do is put the Journey onto the Brontodon, and then sacrifice the Brontodon targeting the Journey. When you sacrifice Brontodon, Journey to Eternity will trigger, and that trigger will go on the stack above Thrashing Brontodon's ability. So Brontodon will come back, and you'll flip over your Journey to Eternity. Easy as that. That's awesome. But the other 3-drop that's really important to the deck is the 2 copies of Yahenni Undying Partisan. I don't want to play too many copies of this, but it is obviously sometimes important to be able to control when your creatures die if you're trying to flip over a Journey. That being said, though, Yaya is still sometimes useful even after you flip into Ixalan, you know? You can sacrifice creatures to make Yahenni indestructible, and then just reanimate them. Bada bing. Simple as that. And even more importantly, you can sacrifice creatures to Yahini every turn and reanimate them every turn to repeat their ETB triggers. Some of our creatures have really good enter the battlefield triggers that if we get them every turn, we just slap win the game. It's just really, really hard to deal with some of the looping that we can do in this deck. And Yahini's a big part of that. But let's take a step back and look at some of the 2-drops that we're playing in the deck, because this is a really, really important spot on the curve. Conventional wisdom is that if you want to see a 2-drop on turn 2, you play 10 or 11 2-drops. I'll do it one better, and I'll play 12 2-drops. Not only because we have a great selection of 2-drops for this deck right now, but because I want to see one on turn 2 as consistently and as often as possible so that we can get a turn 3 journey. So let's trot them all out here and take a look at them. We're going to play 4 copies of Glint Sleeve Siphoner, 4 copies of Servant of the Conduit, and 4 copies of Merfolk Branchwalker. Now, all of these have something in common, and that's that even if your opponent removes them, you got some sort of value off of them when they entered the battlefield. I actually really like Merfolk Branchwalker in this deck. Even though I wasn't playing it originally, it's great value in this deck. Again, even if they kill it, you got some value when it explored, You can dump cards into the graveyard to reanimate later if you want to, and it helps you hit your 3rd land drop to make sure you can get to Journey. I like a lot about Merfolk Branchwalker in this deck, but of course I like the 2 energy guys too. We need some ramp in this deck. We're playing 4 and 5 drops, so Servant of the Conduit's ramp is welcome, absolutely, and it's important too, because on turn 3, you can play a Journey to Eternity and still have a mana open to protect that play if you played a turn 2 Servant. That's important too. And of course, Glint Sleeve Siphoner is maybe, possibly the best 2-drop in the entire format. It's in the conversation at the very least. This is one of the better card advantage engines in the whole deck, other than Journey. Actually drawing cards is really, really nice. And another thing I like about Glint Sleeve Siphoner, by the way, is that it's kind of a must-kill. They can't just let it through once we get a Journey on it. And allow us to draw cards off of it, because that way they're damned if they do, damned if they don't. If we flip over Atzel after they do kill it, then we get card advantage off of the Atzel. But if they just let Glint Sleeve keep going through unblocked, then they're going to let us get card advantage off of that too. So I like Glint Sleeve for that reason too. They sort of have to kill it. Now, not only do all of the 2-drops that we're playing have some sort of enter the battlefield trigger, again, super important. I cannot stress how important it is in this deck, that we get value off of our creatures even if they are removed, and when we reanimate them, we have repeatable enter the battlefield triggers. That's really powerful too. So not only are all of our 2-drops going to do it, but all of our other creatures, essentially, in the whole deck are going to do that. And up here at 4, 5, and even higher actually on the curve, I want to really focus on some powerful, repeatable enter the battlefield triggers that we can get. And that all starts with the 2 copies of Ravenous Choo Choo, at least 2 copies. Now, I'm only playing a pair of Chupacabras in the deck because there's a spell at 4 mana that I feel like we absolutely must play in any deck that has black in it. You probably guessed what it is, but that spell is just kind of better than Chupacabra. But we can't reanimate a spell every single turn. We can with Chupacabra. The card's fine already by itself. It's great value. It's a Necrotal. We've always loved these in Magic history. Being able to essentially get card advantage, that word again, when you play a creature, we get a body, we get rid of one of their bodies. That's amazing. Creatures like this are always good, but in a deck where you can repeat that trigger like 3 times in a game or more sometimes, that's really crazy. Being able to loop this if you have a Yahini and an Atzel out is just really hard for them to do much about. Continuing on that train of thought, though, I'm also going to play 3 copies of Verdurous Gearhulk, because if you're in the situation where you're playing a Gearhulk every single turn, you're probably going to win the game. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say you're probably going to win if you do that. Here's some tech, though. I really like the way this plays with Yahini. Let me just throw that out there, because you can make it's just amazing to have a creature that you can make indestructible and also put a bunch of counters on. Yahini can get to like 8/8 pretty easily, or more, even bigger. If you just repeat Verdurous Gearhulk triggers, like just a couple of turns, Yahini gets absolutely crazy, and you can make her indestructible. Just sack the Gearhulk and then reanimate it, to make it indestructible. So it's actually a pretty impressive combination sometimes to have a repeatable thing that gets you all the counters in the world and a creature you can make indestructible at will. That's very nice. For that matter, I should have pointed this out a second ago, but Yahini also works great with Ravenous Chupacabra, another little combo there. Every time Chupacabra eats something, Yahini gets a little bit stronger, so that's cool. And it also works with Noxious Gearhulk, which we're playing a copy of. The same trick, Yahini gets bigger every time that this bashes something over the head. And it's really nice to be able to repeat this trigger because we also gain life off of it, which can really put the game out of reach. Also, by the way, in the case of both of our Gearhulks, this and Verdurous, it's nice to have some really big dudes that we can just keep bringing back. over and over if that's what we need to do. I mean, having huge guys that are very hard to permanently deal with, that's a recipe for success. So these are, in a way, finishers too. But we're also going to play some spells. I've alluded to that a few times, so that should be of no surprise. And you probably already guessed a few of them. So I'm just going to quickly tell you that we're playing 4 copies of Fatal Push and 3 copies of Vraska's Contempt because we're playing black, we want removal, and we're a non-budget deck. So it's pretty much how things shake out nowadays. You just have to make room for these cards, for the most part. Contempt takes care of some things that we wouldn't otherwise be able to take care of. You know, we've got Chupacabra, we've got Noxious Gearhulk, we've got some other sources of removal, but we have to be able to exile certain things in this format to take care of them for good. So I just wanted a few pieces in the deck that could actually do that and help stabilize our life total against really fast decks. So that's important too. And Fatal Push is actually a little bit better in this deck than it is even in other decks. You know, we've got Yahenni, we've got Thrashing Brontodon, we've got things like Field of Ruin and Evolving Wilds in the mana base. So we've got a lot more ways to hit that revolt than a lot of other decks would. So at least I got to point that out too. But we are actually playing one more spell in the deck, and it might surprise you, actually. We're going to play 3 copies of not Blossoming Defense. I know that you're probably expecting Blossoming Defense in this slot, but I'm actually playing Duress instead. Please, please, hear me out. Now, obviously, I know that Blossoming Defense is instant speed, and that makes a big difference when you're trying to land your Journey to Eternity. But, I don't know if you know this, all you have to do is play Duress before you play Journey to Eternity. And it gives you so much more information than Blossoming Defense. That's what it all comes down to. I think Blossoming Defense is in a lot of ways a much more narrow card than Duress. Duress gives you far much more information about what your opponent's doing, their game plan for the rest of the whole entire game, you know. And I think that's really, really important. And there's also, sometimes if you played Blossoming Defense, they'll be able to play another removal spell in response to your Blossoming Defense. Put that on the stack on top of BD, and then you still lose your guy. That happens. But with Duress, you can see if they have the ability to do that before they do it and plan accordingly. Again, the information is the most important part about Duress. And there's so many control decks and mid-range decks that play removal and, you know, mono-red decks that play a full suite of shock and lightning strike and stuff that Duress is almost always going to land on something, even if we play it in the main deck. So in a way, I think that it's a much wider piece, you know, if we're trying to protect Journey to Eternity. But even if we're not trying to protect a Journey, it's obviously in that situation even better than a Blossoming Defense because we can get things like Godfir's Gift out of our opponent's hand, Planeswalkers like Chandra, big spells, removal spells obviously. So I just think that Duress has so much more impact than a Blossoming Defense, and it's more proactive obviously too. It gives us so much more information that I will definitely play it over Blossoming Defense. I mean, we're going to play Duress in the board anyway against control decks. Let's just move it to the main here to where we can use it not only to hose control decks, but also to help protect our Journey. And we're playing 24 lands in this deck, which may seem a land light. You know, we're playing a 6-drop. You know, it seems like the deck's pretty hungry. You know, we need 5 mana to even activate our land. But we are playing Servant of the Conduit. Journey to Eternity is effectively ramp once we flip it over. Glintsleeve Siphoner helps us draw into lands. Merfolk Branchwalker helps us get lands. So we're getting lands. Don't worry about it. 24 is right. Here's our sideboard right here. As promised, we're finishing off playsets of Duress and Thrashing Brontodon, but most of the sideboard is geared towards killing control decks. You know, we've got Kitesail Freebooter in there, which you can make a case for in the main deck. I like the ability to play this turn to help clear a path for our Journey to Eternity, and then once we stick Journey, we really don't care if they can remove Kitesail. You know, it's fine. Get your removal spell back. I'll just reanimate whatever you kill with it. Who cares? So I think you could make a case for Kitesail in the main deck, but I just mostly really like it against control decks. So we'll play it in the sideboard. Scrapheap Scrounger, on the other hand, also great against control decks, and I was playing this in the main at first, but I decided that Merfolk Branchwalker was the better 2-drop for the main deck, especially in a deck where you want the ability to block with a creature that has a Journey to Eternity on it, and just Scrapheap Scrounger is not great when it has a Journey on it. But it is great against control decks where it's just another way to have a recursive threat that can keep coming back. But for even further hosing of control decks, we've got Lost Legacy and even Dreamstealer, which is pretty ambitious, but Dreamstealer is so awesome to keep reanimating, and we can just eternalize it, and the control deck can't counter either of those plays. So Dreamstealer can just be backbreaking. And Lost Legacy is especially good against all the approach builds too. We are playing some stuff that's not necessarily anti-control, starting with Gonti, which, yes, is anti-control, but it's also anti-mid-range, you know. If you come across the Grixis energy decks that play a lot of creatures and removal and stuff, then this is just a fantastic card. Almost no matter what you're playing against, though, Gonti's good. I see a lot of, like, one-of Gontis in main decks in this format, just because Gonti's a good place to be right now, so I definitely want the option out of the board, especially when it comes to just repeating this enter the battlefield trigger over and over. That can be hilarious, so you might even want to explore a one-of in the main deck. I could see that happening. And finally, you see the 3 copies of Yahenni's Expertise, which was in the main deck when the building process started. I really liked the idea of going, you know, creature on turn 2, journey on turn 3, into turn 4, Yahenni's Expertise. Because then you could kill whatever you put the journey on, you know, it'll come back, and you could play a free creature out of your hand with Expertise. At that point, you've killed everything on the board, very likely, and you've got 2 creatures on board and a land to reanimate more creatures. That seems like a really good place to be in. But Expertise wasn't, at least in my experience, relevant in enough matches. I felt like Chupacabra was just the better card, especially considering we can just reanimate it over and over for more kills. And we can kill bigger stuff with it than Yahenni's Expertise can kill. And here are your power rankings, finally, after that long-winded spiel. All apologies for that, but final score of 66 right here, which is a pretty competitive score, honestly, and we check a lot of boxes. In the way of being a good deck, you know. Our offense and defense are both pretty high. That's because green and black have both a good suite of, you know, really good value creatures alongside really awesome removal, like Fatal Push and Vraska's Contempt and stuff. And we've got a lot of good card advantage in this deck, like a mid-range deck wants. You know, we've got Merfolk Branchwalker can draw us lands, Glintleaf Siphoner draws us cards, you know, Atzel is card advantage in a way too. So, again, just for a good mid-range deck, we check all the boxes. No matter what you do, it's just a solid, classic mid-range deck that can win matches through good removal, some early damage, but really crazy creatures in the endgame that outclass anything aggro's trying to do, and some really good grindage. You know, again, this thing grinds like no other, and we're sort of, in some cases, like an Aristocrats deck. You know, we get value from sacking creatures to Yahenni. We can just bring those creatures back with Atzel and just loop. You know, almost no other deck in the format has the ability to loop the same creature over and over. So it feels Aristocratsian too. There's just a lot of cool things about this deck. It's really versatile. Lots of offense, lots of defense, good consistency, amazing late game. So try this thing out. If you like any of those playstyles, this might be the one for you. I actually like this more than Snake right now, or at least it's more fun to play than Snake decks. Now, since we didn't really care too much about the budget when we built this deck, it hit about $175. $175, though, is not too terrible in this format, where some decks cost like $350. You know, you can do way worse than $175 for a fun, good mid-range deck that can definitely win you some games, even when you're off of your plan. Again, you know, you never see a journey, you can still win a game. So try this thing out. I liked it. And by the way, if you are interested in looking at this deck all in one place, as always, click the first link in the description. That'll take you over to my spances, a TCG player. They're good people. They are good people. But they're the cheapest place you can get this deck online right now. It's about $175, and if you get lightly played stuff, you can get it down to like $140, $150. But most other sites, this deck will cost you at least $200. So go over to TCG Player, hit the first link in the description if you're interested. There's other stuff you can do. You can like the video if you enjoyed the video. Put me in more recommended feeds if you want people to see this funky thing, you know. You can also follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev. Subscribe if you're new. Make sure you do that. Dominaria spoilers coming up relatively soon. So sub if you're new. Hit the bell for the notifications. Or you can throw me $1 a month. One whole George Washington American dollar. Actually, it doesn't have to be an American dollar. You can do it from anywhere. But $1 a month on Patreon, and I'll let you know what decks we're doing the day before we do them. Just go to patreon.com/SBMTG or click the second link in the description. Feel free to do that. But in any case, I think that's all I got for this one. I will catch you cats later. I'm Deb from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.